Elena Carter believed she had finally escaped the most dangerous man she'd ever loved. For 3 years, she survived alone in crushing poverty, keeping his twins hidden in the city's forgotten corners where power and wealth never looked. But on one rain-soaked night, when desperation drove her into the open with two sick children in her arms, fate placed her directly in his path. Adrian Vescari, the ruthless crime boss who ruled the shadows, stopped his SUV and saw their faces. In that single frozen moment, he knew. And Elena's fragile world shattered. If you're drawn to stories of power, secrets, and impossible second chances, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Teet. The rain fell in sheets across the cracked pavement, turning the narrow streets of the South Side into rivers of filth and forgotten dreams. Elena Carter hunched forward, her thin jacket doing nothing against the cold that seemed to seep into her bones. In each arm she held a child, Emma on her left, Lucas on her right, their small bodies burning with fever, their faces flushed and damp with sweat that had nothing to do with the rain. "Almost there, babies," she whispered, though she wasn't sure they could hear her over the storm. "Almost there." Her legs ached. Everything ached. She'd worked a double shift at the diner, 14 hours on her feet serving coffee and dodging the wandering hands of men who thought a waitress uniform meant invitation. The tips had been decent tonight, $63 that would have to cover food, rent, and now medicine. She'd counted it 3 times in the stockroom before leaving, her fingers trembling with exhaustion and something that felt dangerously close to despair. The pharmacy's neon sign flickered 2 blocks ahead, a beacon in the darkness. Closing in 12 minutes. She walked faster, ignoring the burning in her calves, the way her breath came in ragged gasps. Emma whimpered against her shoulder, and Lucas's small hand clutched weakly at her collar. "I know, sweetheart. I know it hurts." Elena kissed the top of Emma's head, feeling the unnatural heat radiating from her daughter's skin. The fever had started that morning, both of them, almost simultaneously, as if their twin connection extended even to illness. By afternoon, they'd been listless and glassy-eyed. By evening, Elena had known she couldn't wait until her next paycheck. Some things couldn't wait. The clinic would have been cheaper, but the free clinic had closed at 5. The emergency room would have bankrupted her, assuming they'd even treat the children before demanding insurance she didn't have. So she'd bundled Emma and Lucas into their threadbare coats and headed out into the storm, praying the pharmacy would have something, anything, that would break their fevers. 3 years. She'd survived 3 years on her own. 3 years of keeping them safe, keeping them hidden, keeping them alive despite odds that would have crushed someone weaker. 3 years since she'd walked away from the man who'd given her these beautiful children, the man whose world had been built on violence and blood and power she couldn't reconcile with the future she wanted for her babies. Adrian Vescari. Even thinking his name made her chest tighten with an old, familiar mixture of longing and terror. She'd been 22 when they met, a college student working nights at an upscale restaurant to pay for textbooks. He'd walked in alone, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her tuition, and sat at one of her tables like he owned the place. Maybe he had. She'd learned later that Adrian Vescari owned half the city, the half that operated in shadows, where debts were paid in loyalty or blood, where his word was law and his reputation preceded him like a storm. But that first night, she'd just seen a handsome man with dark eyes that seemed to look straight through her practiced smile into something deeper. He'd been polite, generous with his tip, and he'd come back the next night, and the night after that. Within a month, she'd been his. Within 6 months, she'd been pregnant. Elena shook her head sharply, forcing the memories back into the locked box where they belonged. The past didn't matter. Adrian didn't matter. What mattered were the 2 small lives in her arms, depending on her to keep putting one foot in front of the other. She stepped off the curb to cross the final street, and that's when she heard it, the low, powerful purr of an expensive engine cutting through the sound of rain on pavement. Headlights swept across the intersection, bright and blinding. Elena froze halfway across the street, squinting against the glare. The vehicle, a black SUV with tinted windows and chrome that gleamed even in the storm, rolled to a stop less than 10 feet away. Her heart lurched. Not here. Not now. She tried to move, tried to hurry to the other side, but her exhausted legs wouldn't cooperate fast enough. The driver's door opened. "Please!" Elena called out, raising her voice to be heard over the rain. I'm just trying to get across. I'll be out of your way and... The words died in her throat. The man who stepped out of the SUV wore a black coat that hung perfectly from his broad shoulders, the kind of garment that whispered wealth and power. Rain plastered dark hair to his forehead, but he didn't seem to notice. His eyes, those same dark eyes that had haunted her dreams for 3 years, locked onto hers with an intensity that made the world tilt sideways. Elena. His voice hadn't changed, deep controlled, carrying an authority that made lesser men step aside without being asked. Adrian Vescry stood in the middle of the rain-soaked street, staring at her like she was an apparition, like she'd risen from the dead. Adrian. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. We need to... She tried to move past him, but he was already walking toward her, his gaze traveling from her face down to the children in her arms. Elena saw the exact moment when his eyes registered Emma's small face tucked against her shoulder, when they shifted to Lucas clinging to her other side. She saw the exact moment when everything changed. Adrian stopped 3 feet away, close enough that she could see the rain dripping from his jaw, close enough to see the way his expression transformed from shock to something harder, sharper. How old are they? His voice had gone deadly quiet. That's none of your business. Elena tried to step around him, but he moved with her, blocking her path. How old? 2.5, she heard herself say, and hated how her voice shook. They just turned 2.5. She watched him do the math, watched the realization settle over his features like a mask clicking into place. 3 years since she disappeared without a word. 9 months before that. They're mine. Not a question. A statement of fact delivered with absolute certainty. They're mine, Elena corrected, holding Emma and Lucas tighter against her. I need to get them to the pharmacy. They're sick and I don't have time for a... Sick? Adrian's attention sharpened immediately. He took another step closer, his gaze sweeping over the children with an intensity that made Elena's pulse race. What's wrong with them? Fever. It's probably just a cold, but I need to get them medicine before the pharmacy closes, so if you'll just... Dante! Adrian's voice cracked like a whip through the rain. The passenger door of the SUV opened, and a massive man in a dark suit emerged. Clear the pharmacy. Everything. I want it empty in 2 minutes. Wait, what? Elena backed up a step. You can't just... Marco! Another man appeared from the rear of the SUV, this one younger, but no less intimidating. Call Dr. Reeves. Tell him I need him at the estate immediately. 2 children, both running fevers. Move. Adrian, stop. Elena's voice rose, panic threading through her words. You can't just take over a pharmacy. I just need to buy some children's fever reducer and... He turned back to her, and the look in his eyes stopped her cold. There was fury there, barely leashed, but underneath it something else. Something that looked almost like fear. My children are sick, he said, his voice low and dangerous. And you thought you'd handle it by buying generic medicine from a corner pharmacy with whatever scraps you could afford? I'm handling it the best I can, Elena shot back, feeling her own anger rise to meet his. I've been handling it for 3 years. We don't need 3 years. Adrian moved closer, close enough now that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the cold rain. 3 years you kept them from me. 3 years you let them live in... He gestured sharply at her threadbare jacket, at the worn shoes on her feet, at everything she'd become. This, Elena said, her voice shaking with rage and exhaustion and 3 years of barely surviving, was better than raising them in your world, better than teaching them that power comes from fear, that money comes from blood, that... They're burning up, Elena. His words cut through her tirade like a knife. Your pride, your moral superiority, your judgments about my world, none of that matters right now. What matters is that there are 2 sick children who need help, and you're going to accept it. Before she could respond, before she could gather the strength to fight him, Adrian turned to the man called Dante. Is it done? Yes, sir. Pharmacy's clear. Owners being compensated. Good. Adrian reached out toward Emma, and Elena instinctively pulled back. Don't touch her. Something flickered across his face. Hurt, maybe, or anger, but his voice remained steady. I'm not going to hurt them, Elena. I'm going to help them. You can fight me, exhaust yourself trying to prove you don't need me, or you can let me do what should have been done hours ago. He paused, his gaze holding hers. Choose. Elena looked down at Emma's flushed face, at Lucas's labored breathing. She thought about the $63 in her pocket, about the pharmacy's fluorescent lights and the generic medicine she'd planned to buy, about carrying them back to their one-room apartment where the heat barely worked and the landlord hadn't fixed the leak in the ceiling. She thought about her pride, her principles. Her 3-year war to prove she could do this alone. Then she looked at her children and made the only choice she could. Fine, she whispered. But after they're better, we're gone. Adrian's expression gave nothing away. After they're better, we'll talk. He turned and started toward the pharmacy, expecting her to follow. Dante fell into step beside her, producing an umbrella from somewhere and holding it over her and the children. It was a small gesture, almost absurd under the circumstances, but it made Elena want to cry. The pharmacy had indeed been cleared. The few customers who'd been inside were gone, and the owner stood behind the counter looking nervously between his suddenly empty store and the intimidating men in expensive suits. When Adrian walked in, the man actually flinched. "Mr. Vescari," he stammered. "Of course. Anything you need." "Children's fever reducer," Adrian said, his tone brooking no argument. "The best you have. Also electrolyte solution, children's pain reliever, any medicine for respiratory symptoms. If you're not sure if I need it, include it anyway." "Yes, sir. Right away, sir." Elena stood just inside the doorway, water dripping from her clothes onto the linoleum floor, watching Adrian command the space with the same casual authority he brought to everything. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure, the way people bent to his will, the way the world seemed to rearrange itself around his desires. She'd forgotten this, or maybe she'd forced herself to forget, to remember only the danger and not the seduction of being the center of that powerful man's attention. "Elena." Adrian's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He'd moved closer, close enough to reach out and brush a strand of wet hair from her face. She jerked back before he could touch her. "The doctor will meet us at the estate. He's the best pediatrician in the state." "I can't go to your estate," she said, even though she knew it was futile. "I have work tomorrow. And the apartment will still be there when the twins recover." His eyes softened slightly. "I'm not asking you to move in permanently. I'm asking you to let me take care of my children while they're sick." "Our children," she corrected automatically, then cursed herself for the slip. Claiming shared parenthood gave him power she couldn't afford to grant. "Our children," Adrian agreed, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. There was possession in his tone, yes, but also something else. Something raw and almost vulnerable. "Our children, who I didn't know existed until 5 minutes ago. Our children who are sick and need help." The pharmacy owner returned with 3 large bags filled with medicine. "I included everything you might need, Mr. Vescari. Thermometers, vapor rub, cool compress packs, multiple brands of fever reducer, just in case one works better." "Good." Adrian pulled out his wallet and dropped several $100 bills on the counter without counting them. "Keep the change, and forget you saw us tonight." "Of course, sir. Absolutely, sir." Elena wanted to protest the casual display of wealth, the way Adrian threw money around like it meant nothing, but Lucas chose that moment to whimper and press his hot face into her neck. The fight drained out of her. "The car's waiting," Adrian said, gesturing toward the door. She followed him into the rain, Dante still holding the umbrella over her and the twins. The SUV's interior was warm and smelled of leather and subtle cologne. Adrian climbed in first, then turned to help her with the children. "I can manage," Elena said, but her arms were shaking with exhaustion. "I know you can," Adrian replied quietly, "but you don't have to." Those words, so simple, so dangerous, almost broke her. For 3 years, she'd had to manage everything alone, had to be strong enough for 2 babies and herself, had to work brutal hours and survive on 3 hours of sleep, had to make impossible choices with impossible resources. She let Adrian take Lucas. The sight of her son in his father's arms, Lucas's dark hair so similar to Adrian's, his small face nestled against that expensive coat, made Elena's throat tight. Adrian held him with surprising gentleness, supporting Lucas's head with one large hand while his other arm cradled the boy's small body. "He looks like you," Elena heard herself say. "He has your eyes," Adrian replied, not looking up from Lucas's face. "Emma, too. I saw that immediately." Elena climbed into the SUV with Emma still in her arms, settling into the leather seat as Dante closed the door behind them. The vehicle pulled away from the curb with smooth precision, carrying them away from the neighborhood Elena had called home for 3 years, away from her carefully constructed life, toward a world she'd sworn never to enter again. Adrian sat across from her in the spacious interior, still holding Lucas, his gaze moving between the boy in his arms and the girl Elena held. She could see him cataloging details, the worn patches on their clothes, the too-thin fabric of their coats, the scuffed shoes on their small feet. Every observation seemed to tighten something in his expression. "Their names," he said finally. "What are their names?" "Emma and Lucas." She tightened her hold on her daughter. "Emma Rose and Lucas James. After your parents." She was surprised he remembered. "Yes." Adrian looked down at Lucas again, his jaw working as if he was trying to contain words that wanted to escape. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "You named them after your parents, who died when you were 19. You gave them family names, family connections, but you didn't give them their father." "Their father was a crime boss," Elena said, meeting his gaze directly. "Their father's world was built on violence and fear. I wanted better for them." "And this was better?" Adrian's control slipped, anger bleeding through his measured tone. "Living in poverty? Working yourself to exhaustion? Struggling to afford basic medicine when they get sick?" "I kept them safe," Elena shot back. "I kept them out of your world, away from people who might hurt them to hurt you, away from learning that power matters more than people." "You kept them from me." The words were quiet, but landed like physical blows. "You kept me from knowing I had children. You denied them a father and me the chance to—" He stopped, his free hand clenching into a fist before deliberately relaxing. "We're going to have a long conversation about that, Elena. But not tonight. Tonight, we focus on getting them well." The rest of the drive passed in tense silence, broken only by the twins' occasional whimpers and the soft sound of rain against the windows. Elena watched the city change outside, the rundown neighborhoods giving way to cleaner streets, then to manicured lawns and gates that whispered exclusivity, and finally to the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. Adrian's estate sprawled behind high walls and sophisticated security, the kind of place Elena had visited exactly 3 times during their relationship. She'd hated it then, the ostentatious display of power, the armed guards, the sense that every beautiful thing was tainted by the ugliness required to acquire it. She hated it even more now, knowing she was bringing her children here. The SUV stopped in front of the main house, all stone and glass and architectural arrogance. Dante opened the door, and Elena stepped out into rain that had softened to a drizzle. Adrian emerged with Lucas still in his arms, moving with the easy confidence of a man on his own territory. "This way," he said, leading her up the wide steps to double doors that opened before they reached them. Inside, the house was exactly as Elena remembered. Too large, too perfect, too much of everything. But it was warm, blessedly warm, and within seconds of entering, a woman in her 50s appeared with towels and a look of professional concern. "Mr. Viscari, Doctor. Reeves is waiting in the blue guest suite. I've prepared it as a temporary nursery according to his instructions." "Thank you, Mrs. Chen." Adrian started up the curved staircase, still carrying Lucas. "Elena, this way." She followed because she had no choice, because Emma was getting heavier in her tired arms, because every step away from the cold rain felt like a small mercy. The blue guest suite was actually a collection of interconnected rooms, a bedroom with a massive 4-poster bed, a sitting area with comfortable furniture, and what had clearly been hastily converted into a children's space with 2 small beds, bright toys, and medical equipment. Dr. Reeves was a distinguished man in his 60s with kind eyes and calm hands. He looked up when they entered, his professional mask slipping for just a moment when he saw the children. "Mr. Viscari, let me take a look at them." Adrian laid Lucas gently on one of the small beds, and Elena did the same with Emma, though it physically hurt to let her daughter go. Dr. Reeves moved between the twins with practiced efficiency, taking temperatures, listening to their breathing, checking their throats and ears while murmuring soothing nonsense that seemed to calm them despite their discomfort. "Temperatures are 102.3 and 102.1, he announced after a few minutes. "Slight ear infections in both children, some congestion, but nothing that requires hospitalization. I'll prescribe antibiotics and fever reducers. They'll need monitoring tonight. Temperatures checked every few hours, plenty of fluids, rest. He looked at Elena with professional sympathy. You look exhausted. When did you last sleep? I'm fine, Elena said automatically. She worked a double shift today, Adrian supplied, his voice flat. 14 hours. Dr. Reeves frowned. Well, you can't properly care for sick children in your condition. You need rest too. I'll rest when they're better. Elena. Adrian's hand touched her shoulder, and she was too tired to pull away. You're going to sleep. Mrs. Chen will stay with the twins, and I'll be here as well. If anything changes, we'll wake you immediately. She wanted to argue, wanted to prove she didn't need his help, or his housekeeper, or his perfectly appointed guest suite. But Emma chose that moment to call out weakly, Mama, I'm here, baby. Elena moved to her daughter's bedside, smoothing the dark curls back from her flushed face. Mama's here. Stay, Emma whispered. I'll stay, Elena promised, and realized she meant it in more ways than one. At least for tonight, she'd stay in this dangerous world she'd fled, because her children needed things she couldn't provide alone. She'd think about the cost later. Doctor. Reeves administered the first dose of medication to both twins, showing Elena and Adrian how to use the thermometers, what symptoms to watch for, when to be concerned. He left prescriptions and instructions, promised to return in the morning, and departed with the kind of discretion that suggested he was well paid to forget what he'd seen. Mrs. Chen appeared with warm broth, soft bread, and children's clothing that somehow perfectly fit both Emma and Lucas. Elena wanted to ask where they'd come from, but was afraid of the answer. Had Adrian kept baby clothes on hand all this time? Or had someone acquired them in the hour since they'd arrived? The twins ate a little, drank some water, and finally settled into the comfortable beds with clean pajamas and warm blankets. Their fevers had already started to come down, color returning to their faces, breathing easier. Elena sat between the beds, one hand on Emma's back and the other holding Lucas's small fingers, watching them finally relax into genuine sleep. You should eat something. Adrian's voice came from behind her, startling her. She'd almost forgotten he was there, silent and watchful from his position near the door. I'm not hungry. Elena. He moved closer, and she heard the chair scrape as he pulled it up beside her. You haven't eaten all day, have you? I had coffee at work. Coffee isn't food. It was all I had time for. She heard his sharp intake of breath, felt the anger radiating from him, even though his voice remained carefully controlled. How long has it been like this? How long have you been starving yourself to feed them? I'm not starving, Elena said, too tired for this fight. I'm managing. By working doubles and skipping meals? By wearing clothes that are practically falling apart? By living in... He stopped himself, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration she remembered too well. You should have told me, Elena. You should have told me I had children. So you could what? She turned to face him finally, meeting those dark eyes that still affected her more than they should. Take them from me? Raise them in this world? Teach them that money and power solve everything? So I could help, Adrian said quietly. So they wouldn't have to go without. So you wouldn't have to destroy yourself trying to be everything they need. I'm their mother. Being everything they need is my job. And I'm their father, he countered, which makes it my job too. Whether you like it or not, whether you approve of me or not, those are my children sleeping in those beds. My daughter and my son. Mine, Elena. And nothing you say or do will change that. The possessive certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it just made her unbearably tired. After they're better, she said, repeating her earlier words. We're leaving. We'll discuss it, Adrian replied, which wasn't agreement. Mrs. Chen knocked softly and entered with a tray of food, soup, bread, fruit, and tea that smelled of chamomile and honey. She set it on the small table between them, gave Elena an encouraging smile, and quietly left. Eat, Adrian said. It wasn't a request. Elena wanted to refuse out of pure stubbornness, but her stomach growled traitorously. She picked up the spoon and tasted the soup, some kind of chicken broth with vegetables and rice, perfectly seasoned and warming. She ate mechanically at first, then with increasing hunger as her body remembered it needed fuel. Adrian watched her in silence, his presence filling the room in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. When she'd finished half the bowl, he spoke again. "Tell me about them." Elena set down the spoon, buying time. "What do you want to know?" "Everything." His gaze moved to the sleeping children. Their first words. When they started walking, what they like to eat, what makes them laugh. Everything you've experienced that I've missed. There was grief in his voice, raw and real, and it cut through Elena's defenses more effectively than anger would have. "Emma said book first," Elena heard herself say. "She was 9 months old, and I was reading to them before bed. She pointed at the picture and clear as day said book. Lucas said no about a week later, and he's been saying it ever since." Adrian's mouth quirked slightly. "Stubborn like his mother." "Determined like his father," Elena countered, but without heat. They sat in the quiet room, rain pattering against the windows, and Elena found herself talking about Emma's love for stories and Lucas's fascination with anything mechanical, about their first steps, Emma cautious and deliberate, Lucas reckless and confident, about the way they communicated in their own twin language sometimes, finishing each other's sentences even at 2 years old. Adrian listened to every word, his attention absolute, his expression shifting between wonder and pain and fierce protectiveness. When Elena mentioned how Lucas had gotten a fever last winter, and she'd spent 3 nights sleeping on the floor beside his crib at the shelter, she saw Adrian's jaw tighten. "Shelter?" His voice was dangerously quiet. Elena cursed herself for the slip. "It was temporary, just until I found the apartment." "How long?" "Adrian, how long were you and my children in a shelter, Elena?" She met his gaze steadily, refusing to apologize for surviving. 4 months. It was clean and safe, and they have resources for single mothers. We were fine." "Fine." He stood abruptly, moving to the window to stare out at the dark grounds. His shoulders were rigid, his hands clenched at his sides. "You were living in a shelter with newborn twins, and you thought that was fine." "It was better than here," Elena said, standing as well. "Better than raising them around violence and crime and what, Elena?" Adrian turned to face her, his control finally cracking. "Say it. Around me. You thought anything was better than letting me be their father." "Yes," she admitted, because there was no point in lying. "I thought anything was better than letting them grow up thinking your world was normal. That what you do is acceptable. That power justifies everything." "What I do," Adrian said, his voice low and intense, "keeps people safe. It maintains order where the law can't or won't reach. It protects those who have no other protection." "It's still crime, Adrian. It's still illegal and dangerous and wrong. And your moral purity kept my children in a shelter," he shot back. "Your principles meant they went without things they needed because you were too proud to ask for help, to ask for my help. I didn't want your blood money." The words hung in the air between them, ugly and harsh. Adrian's expression went cold, the warmth that had been building during their conversation about the twins vanishing like it had never existed. "Blood money," he repeated softly. "Is that what you think funds all this? What pays for the doctor who just treated our children? What provides the medicine that's bringing down their fevers?" "Yes," Elena said, even though part of her recoiled at her own cruelty. "That's exactly what I think." "Then you're naive," Adrian said flatly. "The world isn't as simple as your college ethics courses made it seem. Sometimes the people who claim to operate in the light do more harm than those of us who work in the shadows. Sometimes the law protects the guilty and punishes the innocent. Sometimes the only justice available is the kind I provide." "That doesn't make it right." "No," Adrian agreed, "but it makes it necessary." They stared at each other across the room, 3 years of arguments and fundamental differences rising between them like a wall. This was why Elena had left. Not because she'd stopped loving him. If she was honest, she'd never stopped. But because she couldn't reconcile who he was with, who she needed him to be. "They're asleep," Adrian said finally, his gaze moving to the twins. "You should get some rest too. The bedroom is through there. I'll stay with them tonight." "I'm not leaving them alone with their father." Adrian's voice was sharp. "I'm not going to hurt them, Elena. Christ, I would die before I let anything happen to them. But if you can't trust me with that, then stay. Take the chair. Watch me all night to make sure I don't somehow damage them with my presence." Elena heard the hurt beneath the anger and hated herself for putting it there. "Adrian, I didn't mean—" "Yes, you did." "What?" He moved to the chair she'd vacated, settling into it with the air of someone preparing for a long vigil. "You've spent 3 years believing the worst of me. I don't expect that to change overnight, but those children are mine, and I'm going to take care of them whether you approve or not." There were 1,000 things Elena wanted to say, accusations and defenses and explanations that probably wouldn't make any difference. Instead, she grabbed one of the extra blankets Mrs. Chen had left and curled up on the small sofa near the window. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under within minutes. Her last conscious thought was of Adrian sitting between the twins' beds, one hand resting gently on each small back, his profile illuminated by the soft glow of the nightlight. He looked like exactly what he was, a dangerous man capable of terrible things. He also looked like a father keeping watch over his children. And Elena didn't know which truth scared her more. Elena woke to the sound of soft laughter. For a moment, disoriented and still half dreaming, she couldn't place where she was. The sofa beneath her was too comfortable, the blanket too soft, the room too warm. Then memory crashed back. The rain, the pharmacy, Adrian's face when he'd seen the twins. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, and found the source of the laughter. Adrian sat cross-legged on the floor between the two small beds, Lucas in his lap and Emma sitting beside him, both children looking infinitely better than they had the night before. Adrian was showing them something on his phone, some kind of video that had Lucas giggling and Emma clapping her small hands together. "Again," Lucas demanded, his voice still a bit hoarse but stronger. "Again, again!" "You've watched it 5 times already, buddy," Adrian said, but his thumb was already tapping the screen to replay whatever had captured his son's attention. Elena's chest tightened at the casual intimacy of the scene. Adrian's hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt wrinkled, dark stubble shadowing his jaw. He looked nothing like the controlled, dangerous man who'd stepped out of that SUV last night. He looked like a father who'd been up all night with sick children and hadn't minded a bit. "Mama!" Emma spotted her first, her face brightening. "Mama's awake!" Adrian's head turned sharply, his dark eyes finding hers. Something flickered in his expression, relief maybe, or challenge, but his voice was steady. "Good morning. Their fevers broke around 4. Dr. Reeves was here an hour ago. He says they're responding well to the antibiotics." Elena stood, her body protesting after a night on the sofa, and moved to kneel beside Emma. She pressed her palm to her daughter's forehead, relieved to find it cool. "How do you feel, baby?" "Good," Emma said, then amended, "My throat hurts a little." "The doctor left popsicles," Adrian said, standing with Lucas still in his arms. The boy had wrapped himself around his father like he'd been doing it all his life, small arms around Adrian's neck, dark head tucked under his chin. He said cold things would help with the throat pain. "Popsicles for breakfast?" Elena raised an eyebrow. "Popsicles is medicine," Adrian corrected, but there was a hint of amusement in his voice. Mrs. Chen also prepared actual breakfast: oatmeal, fruit, toast, things the doctor recommended for upset stomachs. As if summoned by her name, the housekeeper appeared in the doorway with a tray. "Good morning, Ms. Carter. I hope you slept well. I've brought breakfast for everyone." Elena wanted to protest, to maintain her independence, but Emma was already crawling into one of the comfortable chairs, and Lucas was pointing at the tray with interest. She settled into the other chair and accepted the bowl of oatmeal Mrs. Chen handed her, trying not to think about how easy it would be to get used to this. They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence, Adrian feeding Lucas small bites while the boy chattered about the video they'd been watching, something about trains that Elena couldn't quite follow but that clearly fascinated her son. Emma ate slowly, still fighting the sore throat, but she finished her popsicle and most of her fruit. "There are clothes in the closet," Adrian said when the meal was finished and Mrs. Chen had cleared the dishes. "For all of you. They should fit." Elena stiffened. "We have clothes." "You have wet clothes that need to be laundered," Adrian replied evenly. "And the children's things are worn thin. These are just temporary, until yours are clean." It was a reasonable argument, which made it harder to fight. Elena looked down at her own outfit, the diner uniform that still smelled faintly of coffee and grease, the jacket with its broken zipper. She thought about the twins' threadbare coats, The shoes she'd bought at a thrift store because new ones were impossible on her budget. Fine, she said, hating how often she'd said that word since entering Adrian's orbit again. Thank you. If Adrian was surprised by her capitulation, he didn't show it. There's a bathroom through that door. Take your time. I'll stay with them. Elena wanted to argue that too, but Lucas had already launched into another story, this one about a bird he'd seen outside the window, and Adrian was listening with the kind of focused attention that suggested he was trying to memorize every word. The bathroom was ridiculously luxurious, marble counters, a shower that looked like something from a spa, towels so soft they felt like clouds. Elena let herself stand under the hot water for longer than necessary, washing away the rain and fear and exhaustion of the previous night. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a robe that probably cost more than a month's rent, she found the promised clothes waiting. Jeans that fit perfectly. A soft sweater in deep blue. Undergarments still in their packaging, the right size, the kind of quality she hadn't owned in years. She dressed quickly, refusing to think about how Adrian had known her sizes, what it meant that he'd had these things ready. When she returned to the main room, she found Adrian on the floor again, this time with both twins climbing on him like he was playground equipment. Emma had somehow gotten him flat on his back and was sitting triumphantly on his chest while Lucas attempted to crawl over his head. "I'm the queen," Emma announced. "You're my throne." "Thrones don't usually move," Adrian said, but he was careful not to dislodge her as he gently redirected Lucas away from pulling his hair. "This one does," Emma declared with the absolute certainty of a toddler. "Move, throne!" Adrian caught Elena's eye over Emma's head, and something in his expression made her breath catch. He looked happy. Genuinely, uncomplicated happy in a way she'd rarely seen during their time together. Whatever else she thought about Adrian Viscari, whatever judgments she'd made about his choices and his world, in this moment, he was just a man playing with his children. "The queen demands her throne moves," Adrian said solemnly, and proceeded to army crawl across the carpet, with Emma squealing in delight and Lucas trying to climb aboard for the ride. Elena found herself smiling despite everything. "You're going to encourage her bossy tendencies." "She's not bossy," Adrian said, managing to capture Lucas and tuck him under one arm while Emma remained perched on his back. "She's leadership-oriented. She's 2. Never too early to develop executive skills." He rolled onto his side, carefully depositing both children on the carpet beside him. Besides, the world needs more women who aren't afraid to demand what they want. There was something pointed in those words, and Elena wondered if he was talking about Emma or about her. Before she could decide how to respond, a knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Chen appeared again, this time with a man Elena didn't recognize, younger, perhaps 30, with sharp eyes and an expensive suit. He nodded respectfully to Adrian. "Sorry to interrupt, sir, but Mikhail is here. He says it's important." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, the playful father disappearing behind the mask of the crime boss. "Tell him I'll be down in 10 minutes. "Yes, sir." The man left, closing the door quietly behind him. Adrian stood, brushing carpet lint from his wrinkled shirt. "I need to handle some business. Mrs. Chen will stay with you and the children. If you need anything—" "We'll be fine," Elena said quickly, relieved to have him gone. His presence filled too much space, made her remember too many things she'd tried to forget. But Adrian didn't move toward the door. Instead, he walked to where the twins were now examining a set of building blocks Mrs. Chen must have brought while Elena was showering. He crouched down, bringing himself to their eye level. "I have to go to work for a little while," he told them, his voice gentle. "But I'll be back soon. Will you be good for your mama?" "Where do you work?" Lucas asked with a child's innocent curiosity. Elena saw Adrian's jaw tighten slightly. "I have an office downtown. Very boring grown-up stuff." "Do you have a computer?" Emma wanted to know. "Several computers. Can we see them?" "Maybe another time." Adrian reached out and smoothed Emma's curls, then ruffled Lucas's hair. The gestures were tender, uncertain, like he was still learning how to touch them. "Be good, both of you." He stood and walked to the door but paused before opening it. "Elena, we need to talk. Later, when the children are napping." It wasn't a request, and Elena felt her defenses snap back into place. About what? About everything. He left before she could respond, the door clicking shut with quiet finality. Mrs. Chen stayed with them for the next few hours, playing with the twins and bringing more food, a lunch of chicken soup and soft bread that both children ate with improved appetites. The housekeeper was kind without being intrusive, helpful without being overbearing, and Elena found herself relaxing slightly in her presence. Mr. Vascari was very specific about the children's care, Mrs. Chen said as she helped Elena settle the twins for their afternoon nap. He called me at midnight last night with instructions, the right temperature for the room, what foods to prepare, what clothes to order. I've worked for him for 8 years, and I've never seen him so focused. He didn't know they existed until yesterday, Elena said, tucking the blanket around Emma. I gathered as much. Mrs. Chen's tone was carefully neutral. But he knows now. And if there's one thing I've learned about Mr. Vascari, it's that once he decides something matters to him, he's absolutely relentless about protecting it. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they felt like a warning. Both twins were asleep within minutes, their small bodies finally relaxed and healing. Elena stood between their beds, one hand on each of them, and let herself feel the relief she'd been holding back. They were safe. They were getting better. Whatever else happened, that mattered most. I'll be downstairs if you need anything, Mrs. Chen said softly. There are books in the sitting room, and the television has streaming services if you'd like to watch something. Left alone, Elena wandered through the suite, too restless to sit, but too exhausted to do anything productive. The sitting room was elegantly furnished with deep couches and artwork that was probably worth more than she'd earned in her entire life. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked manicured gardens, the rain from last night reduced to a light mist. She found herself at the window, staring out at ground so beautiful they looked artificial. Everything here was like that, too perfect, too controlled, too much the product of money and power. How could she raise Emma and Lucas in a place like this? How could she teach them that kindness mattered more than wealth when they were surrounded by luxury? How could she explain that their father's world was built on things she couldn't accept? You're planning your escape. Elena spun around to find Adrian standing in the doorway, jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle. She hadn't heard him enter, and the fact that he could move that silently both impressed and unnerved her. I'm not planning anything, she said, though they both knew it was a lie. How was your meeting? Productive. He walked into the room, moving with the predatory grace that had first attracted her attention 3 years ago. Mikhail needed approval on a shipment. Nothing that concerns you. Everything about what you do concerns me if my children are here. Our children, Adrian corrected, and there was steel beneath the quiet words. And they're here because you kept them in circumstances that were dangerous in their own way. Poverty kills just as surely as bullets, Elena. Maybe more slowly, but just as certainly. That's not fair. Isn't it? He stopped a few feet away, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. You worked yourself to the bone trying to provide for them. You skipped meals so they could eat. You lived in a shelter, for Christ's sake. All because your pride wouldn't let you ask for help from the one person who had unlimited resources to give it. It wasn't about pride, Elena shot back, feeling her own anger rise. It was about protecting them from your world, from violence and crime, and the kind of life where people get hurt. And what exactly do you think happens to single mothers living in poverty? Adrian's voice was harsh now, controlled fury bleeding through. You think that's safe? You think shelters are safe? You think working double shifts and leaving them with whoever you could find to watch them was protecting them? I did the best I could. You did it alone when you didn't have to. He moved closer, and Elena found herself backed against the window. You made a choice, Elena. You chose to struggle rather than accept help from me. You chose to keep my children from me because you decided I wasn't worthy of being their father. You made that choice for all of us. Yes, I did, Elena said, lifting her chin to meet his gaze, because I knew what raising them here would mean. I knew they'd grow up thinking your lifestyle was normal, that they'd learn to measure worth in money and power instead of character and compassion. I chose to raise them with values, Adrian, with morals. And I would have taught them to be weak? His voice dropped to something dangerous. Is that what you think? That values and strength are mutually exclusive? I think your version of strength involves hurting people. My version of strength involves protecting people. Adrian countered. Protecting those who can't protect themselves. Providing order where there is none. Creating safety in a world that's fundamentally unsafe. Through crime. Through necessity. He placed one hand on the window beside her head, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. You live in a fantasy world, Elena. A world where police actually protect everyone equally, where justice is blind, where following the rules guarantees safety. That's not reality. Reality is that the system fails people every single day and someone has to fill that gap. So you decided it should be you? You decided you were above the law. I decided I was willing to do what others wouldn't, Adrian said. To make the hard choices, to get my hands dirty, to carry the weight so others didn't have to. That's not being above the law, Elena. That's being practical about how the world actually works. They stared at each other, the old argument playing out again with the same fundamental impasse. Elena couldn't accept his worldview, and Adrian couldn't understand her rejection of his methods. It was the same wall they'd hit 3 years ago, the same insurmountable difference that had driven her away. This is why I left, Elena said quietly, because we can't bridge this gap, because what you see as strength, I see as corruption, because I can't teach Emma and Lucas that 2 + 2 = 5 just because their father says it does. I'm not asking you to compromise your values, Adrian said, his voice softening slightly. I'm asking you to see that the world is more complicated than your absolute moral categories. That sometimes the choice isn't between right and wrong, but between bad options and worse ones. And you always choose the bad option? I choose the option that keeps people safe. His free hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture so familiar it made her chest ache. Including you and our children, whether you want my protection or not. Elena should have pulled away, should have stepped out of his orbit, put physical distance between them to match the philosophical gulf. But his touch was doing things to her resolve, reminding her of why she'd fallen for him in the first place. Adrian Vescari was dangerous and unrepentant and everything she'd sworn to avoid. He was also the father of her children, standing in front of her with exhaustion and determination and something that looked almost like desperation in his eyes. What do you want from me, Adrian? I want you to stay, he said simply. Here, where the children can have everything they need, where you don't have to work yourself to death, where they can be safe and healthy and cared for. As what? Your prisoners? His jaw tightened. As my family. The word hung between them, weighted with implications Elena wasn't ready to examine. We're not a family. We're two people who share children and fundamentally different worldviews. We could be, Adrian said, if you'd let yourself consider it, if you'd stop running from every feeling that scares you. I'm not scared. You're terrified, he countered. You've been terrified since the moment you realized you loved me 3 years ago, terrified of what that meant, what you might have to compromise, what you might have to accept about yourself. That's not, you loved me, Elena. His thumb traced her bottom lip, and she felt the touch like electricity. You loved me even knowing what I was, what I did, and that scared you more than any of my enemies ever could. So you ran. You took the children and ran, and you've been running ever since. I left to protect them. You left to protect yourself, Adrian said, but there was no cruelty in the words, just a painful honesty that cut deeper than anger. You left because staying would have meant accepting that you could love someone like me, that your carefully constructed moral framework had room for gray areas and complicated truths. Elena wanted to deny it, to throw his words back in his face with righteous anger, but standing this close to him, feeling the pull that had always existed between them, she couldn't quite manage the lie. Even if that were true, she said carefully, it doesn't change anything. I still can't raise Emma and Lucas in your world. I still can't accept what you do as right or necessary or justified. I'm not asking you to accept it, Adrian replied. I'm asking you to accept me, all of me, including the parts you don't like. The way I've accepted all of you, including the stubborn pride that let you struggle rather than ask for help. That's different, is it? He leaned closer, his breath warm against her face. You made choices I didn't agree with, choices that hurt our children, but I've accepted that you did what you thought was best. Can't you give me the same consideration? Your choices involved breaking the law. Your choices involved keeping me from my children for 3 years, Adrian said quietly. Which one of us caused more harm, Elena? The question hit like a physical blow. Elena had spent 3 years justifying her decision, telling herself it was necessary, that she was protecting Emma and Lucas from something worse. But standing here, watching Adrian's face, seeing the grief underneath the anger, she couldn't quite escape the weight of what she'd taken from him. I didn't know you'd care, she whispered. Then you didn't know me at all. Adrian's hand dropped from her face, and he stepped back, putting distance between them. I would have moved the world for them, Elena. For all of you. Instead, you decided I wasn't worth the chance. He turned and walked to the other side of the room, standing with his back to her, shoulders tense. Elena watched him struggle for control, watched the dangerous man wrestle with hurt that probably few people ever saw. I'm sorry, she said, because what else could she say? I'm sorry I kept them from you. I'm sorry I didn't trust you enough to even try. I thought I was doing the right thing. And now? Now I don't know what the right thing is anymore. Adrian turned back to face her, and there was something raw in his expression. The right thing is giving them both of us, letting them have a father and a mother, even if those parents don't agree on everything. The right thing is trying, Elena. Actually trying instead of running the moment things get complicated. And if I can't do it, if I can't accept this world, then we find a middle ground, Adrian said. We compromise. We figure out how to give them the best of both of us while protecting them from the worst. But we do it together, not with you hiding in poverty because your principles matter more than their well-being. It was the word principles that sparked her anger again. My principles are exactly about their well-being, about raising them to be good people, not criminals. I'm not asking them to be criminals, Adrian said with strained patience. I'm asking them to know their father. Is that really so terrible? When their father runs a criminal empire? Yes. Then what do you suggest? His control was slipping again, frustration bleeding into his voice. That I give up everything I've built? Walk away from responsibilities I can't abandon? From people who depend on me? Should I just pretend the last 15 years of my life didn't happen so you can feel morally superior? I don't feel superior, don't you? Adrian crossed back to her, and this time there was real anger in his eyes. You've spent 3 years convinced you were better than me, better than my choices, my world, my way of protecting people. You've held your poverty like a badge of honor, proof that you're morally pure while I'm corrupted. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Adrian said. It wasn't fair that you disappeared without a word. It wasn't fair that I missed the first 2.5 years of my children's lives. It wasn't fair that they lived in a shelter while I had empty rooms in a mansion. Nothing about this situation is fair, Elena, but it's what we have to work with. They stood facing each other, 3 years of hurt and anger and unresolved feelings crackling in the air between them. Elena could hear her own heart pounding, could feel the familiar pull toward this impossible man who challenged everything she believed. I need time, she finally said. Time to think about what's best for Emma and Lucas. Time to figure out if there's any way to make this work. How much time? I don't know. More than a few hours. Adrian studied her face, searching for something. Stay for a week. Let the children recover fully. Let us figure out how to be in the same room without fighting. Then we'll talk about what comes next. A week, Elena repeated, testing the words. 1 week, Adrian confirmed. No pressure, no demands. Just time for the children to get well and for us to see if we can manage civility. It was reasonable. More than reasonable, considering he could probably use his resources to take the children from her if he wanted. The fact that he was asking rather than demanding said something about how much he'd thought about this. Okay, Elena said. 1 week. Something that might have been relief flashed across Adrian's face. Thank you. But after that week, we sit down and seriously discuss custody arrangements, visitation schedules, how this is going to work going forward. Agreed. He moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, Elena, I meant what I said. I'm not trying to take them from you. I'm trying to be part of their lives. Part of all your lives, if you'll let me. He left before she could respond, and Elena sank onto the sofa, her legs suddenly shaky. What had she just agreed to? A week in Adrian's world, watching him be the father she'd never let herself imagine he could be. A week of confronting the feelings she'd buried, the attraction that still pulled at her despite everything. A week of figuring out if love and principles could somehow coexist in the same impossibly complicated life. From the bedroom, she heard one of the twins stir, calling out softly. Elena went to them, settling between their beds, and watched them sleep. Emma had Adrian's dark hair and determined chin. Lucas had her eyes, but his father's confident way of taking up space. They were both of them, her compassion and his strength, her principles and his protection. Maybe that was what they needed. Both parents, both perspectives, both kinds of love. But first, Elena had to survive a week in the world she'd spent 3 years running from. She had a feeling it would be the longest week of her life. The week proved to be nothing like Elena expected. She'd braced herself for constant conflict, for Adrian trying to control every aspect of their lives, for the violence and darkness she associated with his world to somehow seep into their temporary arrangement. Instead, what she got was something far more dangerous to her carefully constructed defenses. She got to see Adrian as a father. The twins recovered quickly under Dr. Reeves's care and Adrian's watchful attention. By the third day, they were running through the mansion's halls with the boundless energy of healthy toddlers, their laughter echoing off marble floors and expensive artwork. Adrian had an entire section of the house converted into a play area seemingly overnight. Soft mats on the floors, age-appropriate toys appearing in coordinated bins, even a small indoor slide that made Lucas squeal with delight. "Where did all this come from?" Elena asked on the fourth morning, watching Emma organize her new collection of stuffed animals with the same serious focus Adrian brought to his business dealings. "I had people acquire it," Adrian said, not looking up from where he was helping Lucas build a tower of blocks. "Children need stimulation, safe play, things designed for their development. You had people acquire half a toy store in 3 days? I have efficient people." He glanced at her, one eyebrow raised. "Would you prefer they had nothing to play with?" That was the problem with arguing against Adrian's methods. The results were undeniably good for the children. Emma had books that taught letters and numbers through colorful stories. Lucas had puzzles that helped with motor skills and problem solving. Both of them had art supplies, musical instruments, and enough variety to keep them engaged for hours. Both of them were thriving in ways Elena had never been able to provide alone. "It's too much," she said, though the protest felt hollow even to her own ears. "It's what they deserve," Adrian replied simply, and went back to building towers for Lucas to knock down with gleeful destruction. The routine they fell into was deceptively domestic. Adrian disappeared for a few hours each morning to handle business he never discussed in front of the children. Elena used that time to play with Emma and Lucas, read to them, teach them the simple lessons she'd been providing in their cramped apartment. When Adrian returned, usually around lunch, he'd join them without asking permission, settling onto the floor or at the small table Mrs. Chen had brought in, designed perfectly for toddler-height dining. "Tell me about your morning," he'd say to the twins, and they'd both talk over each other, trying to explain their adventures. Adrian listened to every word like they were discussing matters of international importance, asking questions that showed he was paying real attention. "And then Mama made the voices different for each character," Emma explained one afternoon, her hands gesturing dramatically. "The bear was really loud, and the mouse was really quiet, and the fox was sneaky." "Sneaky how?" Adrian asked. Emma lowered her voice to what she probably thought was a whisper, but was still clearly audible. "Like this. Very sneaky." "That's very sneaky," Adrian agreed with complete seriousness. "What did the sneaky fox do?" "He tried to trick them, but they were too smart," Lucas chimed in, abandoning his drawing to climb into Adrian's lap. The casual way he did it, like Adrian had always been there to climb on, made Elena's throat tight. "Were they smart like you?" Adrian asked, adjusting his hold to accommodate the squirming toddler. "Smarter," Lucas declared. "They knew everything." "Not everything," Emma corrected with a 2-year-old's conviction about the rules. "Nobody knows everything. That's what Mama says." "Your Mama's right," Adrian said, his gaze finding Elena's across the room. "Nobody knows everything, but smart people know how to learn." It was moments like these that made Elena's resolve waver. Adrian wasn't trying to buy the children's affection or undermine her parenting. He was genuinely engaging with them, learning their personalities, figuring out how to be what they needed. and they responded to him with an ease that suggested some instinctive recognition of their connection. The twins looked like him. Both had inherited his dark hair and strong features, though Emma had softened them with Elena's delicate bone structure. But it was more than physical resemblance. Lucas had Adrian's confidence, the way he approached the world expecting it to rearrange itself for him. Emma had his intensity, the focused way she pursued what interested her. Watching them together was like watching pieces click into place that Elena hadn't realized were missing. "You're good with them," she admitted one evening after the twins were asleep. They'd fallen into a pattern of having dinner together after the children went down, Mrs. Chen preparing meals that appeared like magic and disappeared the same way. "Better than I expected." Adrian set down his wine glass, studying her across the table. "What did you expect?" "I don't know. Distance, maybe? Awkwardness? You were always so controlled, so focused on business. I didn't think children would fit into that." "They fit into everything now," Adrian said quietly. "The moment I saw them, everything else became secondary. Business, reputation, territory, all of it matters less than making sure they're safe and happy." "That's a dangerous admission for someone in your position." "Maybe." He leaned back in his chair, and even relaxed, he carried an aura of coiled power. "But it's the truth. I'd burn down my entire empire before I'd let anything happen to them." Elena believed him, which was part of what terrified her. Adrian's love was absolute and potentially devastating. He'd protect Emma and Lucas with everything he had. But what would that protection look like? How many people would he hurt in the name of keeping them safe? "What are you thinking?" Adrian asked, reading something in her expression. "I'm thinking about what happens when this week ends," Elena admitted. "About what kind of arrangement we can possibly work out that doesn't compromise either of us too much." "What if I told you I want you to stay? All of you, permanently?" Elena's breath caught. "Adrian, hear me out." He leaned forward, intensity replacing the relaxed posture. "Not as prisoners, not under conditions you can't accept, but as a family. You and the children living here, where they have everything they need, where you don't have to work yourself to exhaustion, where we can figure out how to be parents together." "I can't live in your world." "Then I'll change my world," Adrian said, and the certainty in his voice made her pulse race. "I've already started. I'm transitioning away from the more dangerous operations, moving toward legitimate business. It'll take time, but I'm doing it. For them. For you, if you'll stay." Elena stared at him, searching for the lie, the manipulation. But Adrian's face showed only raw honesty. "You'd give up your empire?" "I'd transform it," he corrected. "The parts that are already legal, real estate, investments, security consulting, those can expand. The parts that aren't can be phased out or handed off to people I trust. It won't happen overnight, Elena, but I'm committed to it." "Why?" The question came out barely above a whisper. "Why would you change everything for us?" "Because the alternative is not having you in my life," Adrian said simply. "And that's not acceptable anymore. I lost 3 years with my children. I'm not losing another day if I can help it." "It's not that simple." "It never is." He stood and moved to the window, looking out at the dark grounds. "But that doesn't mean it's impossible. You want them raised with values, with compassion, with an understanding of right and wrong that doesn't rely on power. I can respect that. I can even help with it. What I can't do is pretend I don't exist in their lives." Elena joined him at the window, maintaining careful distance. "What exactly are you proposing?" "Stay here, not in the guest suite. There are family wings we can convert. Give the children stability, security. Let them have both parents under one roof." He turned to face her. "I know you don't trust me completely yet. I know you have reservations about my world, but give me a chance to prove I can be what they need, what you need. And if it doesn't work, if we can't make it function, then we'll figure out an alternative," Adrian said. "Separate residences, shared custody, whatever works. But at least try this first. At least give us a real chance instead of running before we've started." It was the most vulnerable she'd ever seen him, this powerful man all but pleading for a chance to be a father. Elena thought about the apartment she'd been renting, barely larger than this guest suite sitting room. She thought about the double shifts, the constant worry about money, the nights she'd gone to bed hungry so the twins could eat. She thought about Emma and Lucas thriving here, healthy and happy and safe. "I need conditions," she heard herself say. Relief flashed across Adrian's face, quickly masked. Name them. First, you're serious about transitioning to legitimate business. I want proof. Plans, timelines, concrete steps you're taking. Done. I'll have my lawyers draw up documentation showing the restructuring that's already in progress. Second, the children don't get exposed to anything illegal, ever. If you have meetings or dealings that involve your old world, they happen away from here, away from them. Agreed. I've already made it clear to my associates that this house is off limits for certain types of business. Elena took a breath, steadying herself for the hardest condition. Third, I maintain primary custody legally. If I decide this isn't working, if I feel they're in danger or being influenced in ways I can't accept, I can leave with them. No lawyers, no fights, no using your resources to take them from me. Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment she thought he'd refuse. You want me to agree to let you take my children away if you decide my influence is harmful? I want insurance, Elena said. Something that guarantees you won't use your power to trap me here if things go wrong. And you don't see how that's you holding all the cards? How that means I have to trust you completely while you don't have to trust me at all? Yes, Elena said flatly. That's exactly what it means. Because you're the one with the money and the connections and the ability to make people disappear if they cross you. I need something that evens the scales. They stared at each other, the fundamental imbalance of their situation laid bare. Adrian had every material advantage, but Elena held the emotional leverage of the children's primary attachment. Neither position was entirely safe. Fine, Adrian said finally, the word costing him. I'll have legal documents drawn up giving you primary custody with full discretion to relocate if you determine it's necessary for the children's well-being. But I want one condition of my own. Which is? You actually try, Adrian said. You don't look for reasons to leave. You don't sabotage this because you're scared or because it challenges your assumptions. You give it a real honest chance for at least 6 months. Can you agree to that? 6 months of living in Adrian's world, of watching him be a father, of navigating the complicated reality of co-parenting with a man she'd once loved and still couldn't quite stop wanting. 6 months of risking everything she'd built, her independence, her principles, her certainty about who she was and what she believed. 6 months, Elena agreed, and we revisit everything at that point. Honestly evaluate whether it's working. 6 months, Adrian confirmed and extended his hand. Elena took it, feeling the warmth of his palm against hers, the strength in his grip. They shook on it like business partners, but the touch lingered longer than necessary, sending familiar heat up her arm. She pulled away first, needing distance. I should check on the twins. Elena. Adrian's voice stopped her at the door. Thank you. For giving this a chance. For letting me be their father. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and escaped to the guest suite where Emma and Lucas slept peacefully, unaware that their mother had just agreed to completely upend their lives again. The next morning, Adrian was gone before Elena woke. A note on the breakfast tray Mrs. Chen brought explained he had business meetings that would keep him out most of the day. Elena tried not to feel relieved by his absence as she played with the twins, read them stories, and helped them explore the vast gardens surrounding the house. Mama, look! Emma pointed at a fountain where water danced in complicated patterns. It's magic. It's not magic, Em, Lucas said with 2-year-old superiority. It's equipment. Equipment, Elena corrected gently. You're both right, in a way. The equipment makes something that looks like magic. They spent an hour by the fountain, the twins fascinated by the water's movements. Elena found herself relaxing into the beauty of the space, the way sunlight filtered through ancient trees, the careful design that made it feel both cultivated and natural. This could be their life, she realized. This beauty, this security, this abundance. The twins could grow up running through these gardens, swimming in that pool she'd glimpsed beyond the hedge, having every material advantage. But at what cost to their souls? Miss Carter? A young woman in professional attire approached, her smile polite but uncertain. Mr. Viscari asked me to find you. There's someone here who'd like to speak with you. Elena's guard went up immediately. Who? Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, the woman added with a slight smile. She's a child psychologist. Mr. Vescari thought you might want to discuss some concerns about the children's transition. Of course, Adrian had thought of that. Of course, he'd anticipated that moving the twins from their familiar apartment to this mansion might be disruptive, that professional guidance might be helpful. Elena wanted to resent his thoroughness, but mostly she just felt tired. "Can you stay with the children?" she asked the young woman, whose name she learned was Maria. "Of course. I'm actually trained in early childhood development. Mr. Vescari hired me as a nanny if you decide you want one." Another thing Adrian had arranged without asking. Elena swallowed her irritation and headed back to the house, finding Dr. Chen waiting in a comfortable study lined with books. The psychologist was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an easy manner. "Miss Carter, thank you for agreeing to speak with me. I know this is an unusual situation." "That's one word for it," Elena said, settling into the chair Dr. Chen indicated. "Mr. Vescari explained the basic circumstances, that he only recently learned about the children, that you've been raising them alone, and that you're now attempting to create a co-parenting arrangement." Dr. Chen pulled out a tablet, but didn't look at it. "I'm here to help facilitate that transition in a way that's healthiest for Emma and Lucas." "Did Adrian tell you what he does for a living?" "He told me he runs a business empire that involves some legally gray areas," Dr. Chen said carefully, "and that he's actively working to transition to fully legitimate operations. Whether that's true or not isn't my primary concern. What matters is creating stability for the children." Elena found herself appreciating the woman's directness. "What do you need from me? Tell me about the twins, their routines, their temperaments, any concerns you have about how they're adjusting to this new environment." For the next hour, Elena talked. About Emma's sensitivity and Lucas's boldness. About their bond as twins, the way they communicated in their own shorthand. About the transitions they'd already weathered, the shelter, the apartment, the rotating cast of neighbors who'd watched them when Elena worked. "They're resilient," Dr. Chen observed. "That's clear from everything you're describing, but resilience doesn't mean invulnerable. This shift to living here, to suddenly having a father figure present, to this level of material comfort, it's going to affect them in ways that might not be immediately obvious." "That's what I'm afraid of," Elena admitted. "That they'll get used to all this and forget that most people don't live like this. That they'll start measuring worth by wealth instead of character." "That's where parenting comes in," Dr. Chen said. "Children don't develop values by osmosis. They learn them from the adults who model behavior and explain the world to them. You can raise compassionate, grounded children in a mansion just as easily as in an apartment, as long as you're intentional about it." "Can I?" Elena heard the doubt in her own voice. "When their father's world is built on power and control?" "Their father's world is more complicated than that simple reduction," Dr. Chen said gently. "I've observed Mr. Vescari with the children. He asked me to do several sessions where I just watched their interactions. What I saw was a man trying very hard to connect with his children in healthy ways, teaching them to ask for things instead of demanding, helping them understand that other people have feelings and needs, modeling patience and attentiveness." Elena wanted to argue, but she'd seen the same things. Adrian was careful with Emma and Lucas in ways that suggested he'd thought deeply about what kind of father he wanted to be. "The question," Dr. Chen continued, "isn't whether you can raise good children here. It's whether you and Mr. Vescari can work together as co-parents despite your differences. Whether you can present a united front on values even when you disagree on methods." "What if we can't?" "Then you figure out a different arrangement," Dr. Chen said practically. "But from what I've observed and what Mr. Vescari has told me, you both want the same thing: healthy, happy children who grow into good adults. That's more common ground than many co-parents have." After the session ended, Elena walked through the mansion feeling unsettled. Everything Dr. Chen had said made sense, but it also meant trusting Adrian in ways Elena wasn't sure she could manage. It meant believing he'd follow through on his promises about going legitimate. It meant accepting that her black and white moral judgments might be more complicated than she wanted to admit. She found Adrian in the play area with the twins when she returned, all three of them covered in paint from an art project that had apparently gotten enthusiastically out of hand. "We're making a mural," Lucas announced, holding up hands streaked with blue and green. "It's the whole world." "The whole world is very messy," Elena observed, but she was smiling. "All the best art is messy," Adrian said, and there was paint in his hair, on his shirt, across his jaw. He looked nothing like the controlled crime boss who'd stepped out of that SUV in the rain. He looked like a father who'd forgotten to care about expensive clothes when his children wanted to paint. "Mama, come paint with us." Emma held out a brush. "You can do the sky." Elena should have said no, should have maintained some distance, some reminder that this was temporary and conditional and not really their life. Instead, she found herself kneeling on the paint-splattered mat, accepting the brush Emma offered, adding her own strokes to the chaotic masterpiece the twins were creating. Adrian worked beside her, close enough that their shoulders brushed occasionally, sending sparks of awareness through her despite the ridiculous circumstances. His hands that had probably hurt people, that had built an empire through force and fear, were gentle as he guided Lucas's brush to create a sun. "Not too much pressure," he murmured. "Let the brush do the work." Lucas tried, his small tongue poking out in concentration. The result was a lopsided yellow circle that Emma immediately declared was perfect. "It's the happiest sun ever," she announced. "It's smiling because everyone is together." The simple statement hit Elena harder than it should have. Emma didn't know she was describing something they'd never really had. A complete family, both parents present, everyone together, and happy. She caught Adrian's eye across the paint-covered scene and saw her own emotional response reflected in his face. They were both thinking the same thing, that this moment, messy and imperfect and covered in tempera paint, was what they'd both been fighting for in different ways. "It is the happiest sun," Adrian agreed, his voice rough, "because everyone is exactly where they should be." Later that night, after the twins were bathed and put to bed, after the paint was cleaned up and the mural hung to dry, Elena found Adrian on the terrace outside the study. He'd showered and changed, but she could still see a streak of green paint behind his ear that he'd missed. "You have paint in your hair," she said, joining him at the railing. Adrian's hand went to the spot she'd indicated, finding the evidence. "So do you." Elena touched her own hair and felt the stiff spot where red paint had dried. They both laughed, the sound carrying across the dark gardens. "We're terrible at this," Elena said. "At painting?" "At maintaining any kind of professional distance. At keeping this arrangement purely practical." She turned to face him, the terrace lights catching in his dark eyes. "I met with Dr. Chen. What did you think?" "I think you're thorough and manipulative and surprisingly thoughtful about the children's psychological well-being." "I'll take that as a compliment." "It wasn't meant as one," Elena said, but there was no heat in it. She said we need to work on presenting a united front, on co-parenting even when we disagree. She told me the same thing. Adrian shifted to face her fully. She also said that children need to see their parents treat each other with respect, that even if we're not together romantically, we need to model healthy relationship dynamics. "We're barely managing civil conversation most of the time." "We managed paint-covered chaos today," Adrian pointed out. "We managed bath time when Lucas tried to flood the bathroom. We're managing better than you want to admit, Elena." He was right, which was infuriating. Despite everything, their history, their differences, the fundamental chasm between their worldviews, they were finding a rhythm, learning each other's signals, dividing tasks without discussing them, presenting a united front when Lucas tested boundaries or Emma needed reassurance. "I'm scared," Elena admitted. "I'm scared this is working, that I'm starting to believe it could keep working, that I'm forgetting all the reasons I left in the first place." Adrian took a step closer, and Elena didn't move away. "What if those reasons aren't as solid as you thought? What if the man you're seeing now is who I actually am, and the crime boss was just the part you let yourself focus on because it was easier than accepting the whole truth?" "Which is what?" "That I'm complicated," Adrian said. "That I've done things you can't accept, but I'm trying to be better. That I love our children with everything I have, and I'm falling in love with you all over again." He cupped her face with one hand, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. "That maybe, just maybe, you never stopped loving me either." Elena should have pulled away, should have denied it, protected herself, maintained the walls that had kept her safe for 3 years. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her eyes closing against the truth she didn't want to face. "This is a mistake," she whispered. "Probably," Adrian agreed, "but I'm done making the mistake of living without you." He kissed her, and Elena let him, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, as 3 years of denial and longing crashed over her. Adrian kissed like he did everything else, with absolute focus and devastating certainty, like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena pressed her forehead against his chest and tried to remember all her carefully constructed reasons for keeping him at arm's length. She couldn't find a single one that mattered more than the feeling of being exactly where she belonged. Elena woke the next morning with Adrian's arm around her waist, and immediate panic flooding her system. They'd fallen asleep on the terrace sofa after hours of talking, after more kisses that had made her forget every logical reason to keep her distance. Now, in the gray light of dawn, reality crashed back with punishing clarity. She'd let herself fall back into his orbit, let attraction and exhaustion and 3 years of loneliness override her better judgment. She carefully extracted herself from Adrian's hold and hurried back to the guest suite, her heart pounding. Emma and Lucas were still asleep, their small bodies curled under blankets, completely unaware that their mother had just made everything infinitely more complicated. Elena stood under the shower, letting hot water wash away the physical memory of Adrian's touch, while her mind raced. She'd agreed to 6 months, to co-parenting, to giving this arrangement a chance. She hadn't agreed to falling back into a relationship with a man whose world she fundamentally couldn't accept. Except she was starting to accept it, and that terrified her most of all. By the time she emerged, the twins were awake and demanding breakfast. Maria appeared to help, her cheerful efficiency making Elena feel simultaneously grateful and useless. Was this what her life would become? Other people caring for her children while she navigated her complicated feelings about their father? Adrian found them in the breakfast room an hour later, his hair still damp from his own shower, wearing fresh clothes that somehow made him look both dangerous and domestic. His eyes sought Elena's immediately, searching for regret or retreat. "Good morning," he said carefully. "Morning?" Elena replied, focusing on cutting Emma's pancakes into bite-sized pieces. "I want to show you something today," Adrian said, addressing all of them, but clearly speaking to Elena. "If you're willing." "Show us what?" Lucas asked, syrup already smeared across his face. "A surprise," Adrian said. "Something I've been working on, but only if your mama agrees." Elena wanted to refuse on principle, to reassert some boundaries after last night's lapse in judgment, but Emma and Lucas were already bouncing with excitement, and saying no would punish them for her own confusion. "Fine," she said, that familiar word of reluctant agreement. "After breakfast." An hour later, they were in one of Adrian's SUVs driving through the city. Elena watched familiar neighborhoods pass, the diner where she'd worked, the laundromat she'd used every week, the park where she'd taken the twins when they had energy to burn and she had nowhere else to go. "Where are we going?" she asked as they headed toward a part of the city she didn't recognize. "You'll see," Adrian said, and there was something almost nervous in his voice. They pulled up to a building in a neighborhood that was clearly in transition, older structures being renovated, new businesses opening, the kind of area that was becoming something better than it had been. Adrian parked in front of a 3-story brick building with large windows and fresh paint. "This is it," he said, turning off the engine. "This is what?" "Come see." He got out and opened the rear door, helping Emma and Lucas from their car seats with practiced ease that still surprised Elena. The twins grabbed his hands without hesitation, chattering about the new place, completely trusting. Adrian led them to the building's entrance and unlocked the door. Inside, the space was beautiful. High ceilings, hardwood floors, natural light streaming through those large windows. But it was also clearly unfinished, with paint cans stacked in corners and construction equipment scattered around. "What is this place?" Elena asked, her voice echoing in the empty space. "It's going to be a community center," Adrian said, watching her face carefully. "Free childcare, job training programs, legal aid, health services. Everything people in this neighborhood need but can't afford." Elena stared at him, searching for the angle. "Why?" "Because you were right," Adrian said simply. "About a lot of things. About using resources to help instead of just accumulate. About giving back to communities instead of just taking from them." He walked to the center of the room, Lucas still holding his hand while Emma explored the space with curious eyes. "I've spent 15 years building power. Now I want to use it for something better." "This is part of your transition plan," Elena realized. "Going legitimate. It's part of it, yes. But it's also more than that." Adrian met her gaze across the sunlit room. "It's what you wanted for our children. to see that wealth comes with responsibility, that power should be used to protect, not exploit, that caring about people matters more than controlling them. Elena felt something crack in her chest, some wall she'd been maintaining against exactly this kind of hope. "You're doing this because of what I said?" "I'm doing this because you were right," Adrian corrected. "You've been right about more things than I wanted to admit. I was so focused on maintaining control, on the empire I'd built, that I forgot why I started building it in the first place. To create safety where there wasn't any, to help people who had no other options. And somewhere along the way it became about the power itself," Elena said quietly. "Yes." Adrian's admission was stark, honest. "I lost sight of the purpose. You reminded me what actually matters." Lucas tugged on Adrian's hand. "Can we play here?" "Not yet, buddy. The building isn't finished, but when it is, there will be a whole room just for kids to play in, with toys and books and teachers who will help them learn." "Like school?" Emma asked, joining them again. "Like school, but also like fun," Adrian said, crouching to her level. "A place where kids can be safe and happy while their parents learn new jobs or get help with problems." Elena watched him explain community support services to 2-year-olds in terms they could grasp, watched him care about making them understand why this mattered. This was the man she'd fallen in love with 3 years ago, the one who'd told her once, late at night after too much wine, that he'd gotten into this life to protect his neighborhood after his parents died. The one who'd somehow lost that original purpose in the accumulation of power and territory. "Come upstairs," Adrian said, standing and offering his free hand to Elena. She took it before she could think better of it, let him lead their small family up the stairs to the second floor. This level was further along in renovation. Several rooms were already finished, painted in warm colors with comfortable furniture. Adrian led them to the largest room, where a wall of windows overlooked the street below. "This is going to be the main office," he said, "for coordinating services, intake, connecting people with resources." "It's beautiful," Elena admitted, running her hand along the smooth wall. "How long have you been planning this?" "I bought the building 4 months ago," Adrian said, "but I accelerated the timeline after I found you and the twins, after I realized I wanted to build something they could be proud of." 4 months. He'd started this transition before he even knew Emma and Lucas existed, which meant the decision to change had been brewing longer than Elena had realized. Maybe walking away from his old life wasn't as simple as she'd imagined. Maybe he'd been struggling with the same questions she'd had about him, about what kind of man he wanted to be, what legacy he wanted to leave. "There's something else I need to show you," Adrian said, his voice more serious now. He called to Maria, who'd been waiting discreetly downstairs. "Can you watch the twins for a few minutes?" "Of course, Mr. Viscari." Elena followed Adrian up another flight of stairs, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite name. The third floor was different, quieter, more private. Adrian opened a door at the end of the hall and gestured for her to enter. The room was an office, but it was also clearly designed as a sanctuary. A large desk faced those same beautiful windows. Bookshelves lined one wall, already partially filled. A comfortable reading chair sat in the corner near a small table with a lamp. "I don't understand," Elena said. "It's yours," Adrian said from behind her. "If you want it. I know you were studying social work before you got pregnant, before everything happened. I thought maybe you'd want to finish your degree, work here. Use your insight about what people actually need to help run the programs." Elena turned to face him, tears burning her eyes despite her best efforts. "You built me an office?" "I built you an opportunity," Adrian corrected gently, "to do the work you care about, to use your compassion and your principles to actually help people, but only if you want it. No pressure, no obligations." "Adrian, I can't just... This is too much. The community center, the job, all of it is too much." "Why?" He moved closer, his presence filling the space. "Because accepting it means admitting I'm not the villain you needed me to be? Because it's easier to keep me at arm's length if I'm just a criminal instead of someone trying to be better?" "Because it scares me," Elena admitted, the words ripping out of her. "Because last night scared me. Because all of this," she gestured at the office, the building, the future he was offering, "is exactly what I wanted, and I don't know if I can trust it. Trust you. Trust myself not to lose who I am in all this." "You won't lose yourself," Adrian said. "You're the strongest person I've ever met, Elena. You survived 3 years alone with twins, working brutal hours, never complaining or asking for help, even when you needed it desperately. You think a comfortable office and financial security will erase that strength? I think it's easier to have principles when you're struggling, Elena said. When you have nothing to lose, it's simple to judge people who've made compromises. But now you're offering me everything I've wanted: security for the children, meaningful work, a partnership in raising them. What happens to my moral certainty when I'm the one benefiting from the empire I condemned? Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was rough. You're already benefiting from it. The mansion, the doctor, the clothes, the food, all of it came from the empire. The question isn't whether you'll benefit. It's whether you'll use that benefit to help others, or whether your pride will keep you struggling as some kind of penance. The words hit harder because they were true. Elena had already accepted Adrian's help, already let the twins live in luxury she couldn't have provided. She'd already compromised her absolute moral stance by staying even one night. I need air, she said, moving toward the door. Elena, please, just give me a minute. She made it to the stairwell before the tears came, pressing her back against the cool wall as 3 years of certainty crumbled around her. She'd been so sure she was right to leave, so convinced that Adrian's world was incompatible with the values she wanted to teach their children. But standing in that office he'd built for her, seeing the community center he was creating to help others, watching him be the father she'd never believed he could be, all her neat moral categories were dissolving into complicated truth. Adrian found her there, of course. He always found her. He sat on the step below, not touching her, giving her space while still being present. I'm not asking you to abandon your principles, he said quietly. I'm asking you to see that the world is more complicated than you wanted it to be. That people can do wrong things for right reasons. That change is possible, even for someone like me. What if you don't change? Elena asked through her tears. What if this is temporary, some performance to win me back, and in 6 months or a year, you're back to the old ways? Then you leave, Adrian said simply. Like we agreed. You take the children and go, and I won't fight you. But Elena, I need you to actually give this a chance. Not just go through the motions while waiting for me to fail. Actually open yourself to the possibility that this is real. Why does it matter so much? She finally looked at him, this powerful man sitting on a dusty step in an unfinished building, looking at her like she held his entire world. You could have anyone. You could build this empire, go legitimate, create whatever life you want without me making it complicated. Because you're the only one who makes me want to be better, Adrian said. The only one who challenges me, who refuses to accept my excuses, who sees past the power to who I actually am underneath. Because Emma and Lucas deserve both of us, not some civilized custody arrangement where we're polite strangers. Because I love you, Elena. I've loved you since you spilled coffee on me in that restaurant and apologized 7 times in 30 seconds. Elena laughed despite her tears. She'd forgotten that first meeting, her nervousness with the demanding customer at table 6, the way Adrian had been amused rather than angry when she'd sloshed coffee onto his expensive suit. You never told me that bothered you, she said. It didn't bother me. It charmed me. Adrian reached up and brushed tears from her cheek. Everything about you charmed me. Your terrible poetry, your passionate arguments about ethics, the way you cried at sad commercials. I fell in love with who you are, Elena, not some version I wanted to change. But you want me to change now, she said, to accept things I swore I never would. I want you to evolve, Adrian corrected, to grow beyond the simplified worldview you needed when you were younger. That's not the same as changing who you are at your core. You'll always be the woman who values compassion over power. I'm just asking you to see that sometimes power can serve compassion. They sat in the stairwell as light shifted through the windows, as the sounds of the city filtered through the walls. Downstairs, Elena could hear Lucas's laughter and Emma's voice asking Maria questions about everything she saw. Their children, happy and safe, completely unaware of the complicated negotiations happening between their parents. 6 months, Elena finally said. I'll really try. I'll work here, help build the programs, let myself believe this might work. But Adrian, if I see you backsliding, if I see the old ways creeping back, then you call me on it immediately, Adrian said. You don't wait, don't make excuses, don't let it slide. You tell me, we address it, we figure it out together. That's what partners do. Partners, Elena repeated, testing the word. If you'll have me. Adrian stood and offered his hand, not just as the father of your children, but as the man who loves you, who wants to build a life with you, who will spend every day proving he's worthy of your trust. Elena took his hand and let him pull her up. They stood close in the narrow stairwell, and she could see paint dust on his shoulder, the same nervousness in his eyes that she felt in her chest. I'm terrified, she admitted. Me too, Adrian said. But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you. She kissed him then, making the choice consciously this time, not swept away by exhaustion or emotion, but deliberately deciding to trust this dangerous man with her heart again. Adrian kissed her back with careful intensity, like she was precious and fragile and strong all at once. Downstairs, a crash followed by Lucas's uh-oh broke them apart. They both laughed, the tension breaking, and went to investigate what destruction their son had managed in 3 unsupervised minutes. They found Lucas standing over a scattered pile of paint samples, Emma already trying to organize them by color. Maria looked apologetic, but Adrian just knelt and started helping Emma sort. What are you doing, Em? He asked. Making them pretty, Emma explained. They were all messy. I see. And what's Lucas's job? I'm the knocker-downer, Lucas announced proudly, which explained the crash. Every team needs a knocker-downer, Adrian said seriously. But maybe we should knock down things that won't make loud noises? Maria might have a heart attack. The young woman laughed. I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Vescari. They spent the rest of the morning at the community center, Adrian explaining his vision while the twins helped in ways that mostly created more work. But watching him patiently redirect their enthusiasm, teaching them about the building while making it fun, Elena felt something settle in her chest. This could work. It wouldn't be easy, wouldn't be simple, would require constant negotiation and compromise. But seeing Adrian on his knees teaching Lucas how to properly stack paint cans while Emma organized samples by shade, Elena could almost believe they could build something real. The drive back to the mansion was quieter, both twins drowsy from their busy morning. Elena watched the city pass and thought about the office waiting for her, about finishing her degree, about using Adrian's resources to actually help people instead of just judging how those resources were acquired. When can I start? She asked. Adrian glanced at her, understanding immediately what she meant. Whenever you want. The semester starts in 3 weeks at the university. I can have you enrolled in continuing education, arrange for childcare during classes, whatever you need. You've already looked into it. I've already arranged it, Adrian corrected, pending your approval. You were 12 credits from your bachelor's when you left school. You can finish in 1 semester, then decide if you want to pursue a master's. Elena should have been annoyed by his presumption, but mostly she just felt grateful someone had thought ahead when she'd been too exhausted to plan beyond the next shift. What about the twins? Maria during class hours. Mrs. Chen when you're studying, me whenever I'm not in meetings, Adrian said. We'll make it work, Elena. Together. That word again. Together. Elena was starting to believe it might be possible. The twins fell asleep in the car and Adrian carried Lucas while Elena took Emma. They put the children down for naps in the newly prepared nursery. Adrian had had the guest suite converted while they were out, transforming it from temporary space to permanent home. The children's room was perfect. 2 small beds painted in colors Emma and Lucas had apparently chosen during a conversation Elena hadn't witnessed. Toys organized on accessible shelves, books arranged by size, a mural on one wall showing a forest scene with hidden animals for them to discover. When did you do all this? Elena whispered, settling Emma into her bed. While we were at the community center, Adrian said, tucking Lucas in with surprising tenderness. I wanted them to feel like this was really their home, not just a place they were visiting. Elena looked around the room, at the nightlights shaped like stars, at the mobile hanging above them with moons and planets, at every small detail chosen to make 2 toddlers feel safe and loved. She thought about the apartment they'd left behind, the bedroom that had been barely larger than this closet, the threadbare sheets and secondhand furniture. You're spoiling them, she said, but there was no accusation in it. I'm making up for lost time, Adrian replied, and I'm giving them what they deserve, what you all deserve. They stood together watching Emma and Lucas sleep, their breathing synchronized the way twins often was. These children who were both of them, Elena's compassion in Emma's gentle way with her toys, Adrian's determination in Lucas's fearless exploration. They'd made something beautiful together, even if they'd done it accidentally and raised them separately.
I don't know how to do this, Elena admitted. How to be with you again after everything that's happened.
We take it slow, Adrian said, reaching for her hand. We focus on being good parents first. We rebuild trust. We figure out the rest as we go. That's not much of a plan. It's the only plan I have, Adrian said. But I'm committed to it, Elena. To you, to them, to building something real instead of just reacting to circumstances. They left the nursery together, and Elena found herself following Adrian to the master wing she'd never seen during her previous visits to this house. His suite was massive. Sitting room, bedroom, bathroom that rivaled a spa, and a private terrace overlooking the grounds. I'm not ready for this, Elena said, stopping in the doorway. I know. Adrian gestured to a door she hadn't noticed. There's a connecting suite, your own space, your own bathroom, complete privacy, but close enough that we're together, if you want it. Elena walked through the connecting door and found exactly what he'd described. A beautiful bedroom decorated in soft blues and grays, a bathroom with a soaking tub, a small sitting area with bookshelves already filled with her favorite authors. How did you know what books I like? She asked, running her fingers over the spines. I paid attention, Adrian said from the doorway. 3 years ago, during the 6 months we had together. You talked about them constantly. Elena pulled out a worn paperback, her favorite novel about a woman finding herself after loss. She'd read it dozens of times, finding something new each time. The copy on Adrian's shelf was the same edition but pristine. I bought it after you left, Adrian said quietly, trying to understand what you loved about it, trying to understand you. The admission made Elena's throat tight. She'd spent 3 years telling herself Adrian had never really known her, that their connection had been superficial, but he'd remembered her favorite book, her opinions, the things that mattered to her. I don't know what to say, Elena whispered. Say you'll stay, Adrian said. Say you'll give us a real chance. Say you believe even a little that this might work. Elena turned to face him, this complicated man who'd built her an office and remembered her favorite book and was trying so hard to be better than he'd been. She thought about Emma and Lucas sleeping in their perfect nursery. She thought about the community center and the future it represented. She thought about 3 years of struggling alone when she didn't have to. I'll stay, she said. I'll try. I'll believe as much as I can manage. That's all I'm asking. Adrian crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious he'd found after searching too long. Elena let herself lean into him, let herself feel safe for the first time in 3 years. Tomorrow she'd worry about the complications, about maintaining her values, about whether she was making the right choice. Tonight, she'd just be here, with the father of her children, trying to build something worth fighting for. They stood wrapped together as evening light painted the room gold, as their children slept safely nearby, as the future they were building together became just a little more real. It wouldn't be easy. But standing in Adrian's arms, Elena thought maybe it would be worth it. 3 months later, Elena stood in her office at the community center, watching the early morning crowd gather outside. Job seekers lined up for the employment services. Parents dropped children at the daycare. A legal aid clinic was preparing to open for the day. The building hummed with purpose, with lives being changed in small but meaningful ways. We're at capacity for the after-school program, Maria said, appearing in the doorway with her tablet. She transitioned from nanny to Elena's assistant, helping coordinate the center's various services. We have a waiting list of 43 families. Send Adrian the proposal for the annex building, Elena said, making a note. We discussed expanding last week. If we can get the property next door, we can double our capacity. Already done. He approved it this morning and told me to start the purchase process. Elena smiled despite herself. Adrian had learned to trust her judgment on the center's operations, rarely questioning her decisions anymore. He provided resources and connections, but the vision was hers. It was the kind of partnership she'd never imagined possible between them. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Lucas tried to flush his shoes, crisis averted, but bathroom floors soaked. Might be late to the morning meeting. Elena laughed and texted back. Emma did the same thing last month. There's a mop in the hall closet. The domesticity of it still surprised her sometimes. 3 months of co-parenting had created a rhythm she'd never expected, trading updates about the twins' latest adventures, coordinating schedules, presenting a united front when Lucas tested boundaries, or Emma needed reassurance. They'd settled into each other's lives like pieces that had always been meant to fit together. But it hadn't been without challenges. The first real test had come 6 weeks in, when Elena discovered Adrian had a meeting with someone from his old organization. She'd confronted him immediately, remembering her promise not to let things slide. "You said you were getting out," she'd said, her voice tight with anger and fear. "You promised the old world wouldn't touch this house, or the children." "And it won't," Adrian had replied, his jaw set. "But I can't just walk away overnight, Elena. There are obligations, people who depend on me. This meeting is about transferring control of the last operation I'm still involved with. I'm getting out, but I'm doing it carefully so no one gets hurt in the transition." "How long?" she'd demanded. "How long until you're completely done?" 6 more months, maybe 8? I'm being thorough because the alternative is a power vacuum that could turn violent. Is that what you want? They'd fought for hours. Elena terrified he was backsliding, and Adrian frustrated she didn't trust the process. Finally, he'd shown her documents, legal agreements transferring assets, timelines for transitions, evidence that he was systematically dismantling his criminal empire piece by piece. "I'm keeping my promise," he'd said quietly. "But I'm doing it right. Because if I do it wrong, people will die. Can you live with the timeline even if it's not as fast as you want?" Elena had agreed, though it had cost her. Learning to trust Adrian meant accepting that change happened at its own pace, that good intentions didn't always translate to immediate results. It meant compromising her desire for absolute moral clarity in favor of complicated reality. The second test had been harder. 2 months in, someone from Adrian's past had threatened the family. Elena never learned all the details. Adrian kept his promise about shielding her and the twins from that world, but she'd seen the increased security, the tension in his shoulders, the late-night phone calls he took from his study. "Tell me what's happening," she'd demanded. "Someone who's not happy about my transition decided to make a point," Adrian had said carefully. "I'm handling it." "By doing what? Going back to the old ways? Solving problems with violence?" "By protecting my family," Adrian had replied, and there'd been something dangerous in his voice. "Elena, I promised you I'd change. I didn't promise I'd become someone who lets threats against you and our children go unanswered. There has to be another way. And I'm using it," Adrian had said. "I'm using legal channels, law enforcement connections, legitimate business pressure. But if those don't work, if someone tries to hurt you or Emma or Lucas, I will do whatever is necessary. That's not negotiable." Elena had struggled with that for days. She wanted to believe every problem could be solved peacefully, but she also understood Adrian's position. He was trying to leave a violent world, but that world didn't always let people leave quietly. In the end, the threat had been neutralized through exactly the legitimate channels Adrian had described. The person involved was arrested on unrelated charges that Adrian's investigators had uncovered. No violence, no blood, just information used strategically. "You see?" Adrian had said when it was over. "There are always options between absolute pacifism and brutal force. You just have to be smart enough to find them." It had been a lesson for both of them. Adrian learning that Elena's moral framework could be flexible when circumstances required it, Elena learning that Adrian's methods could evolve beyond what she'd feared. Now, 3 months into their arrangement, Elena was surprised by how normal everything felt. She finished her degree, graduating with honors while Adrian and the twins sat in the audience cheering embarrassingly loud. She'd enrolled in a master's program starting in January, planning to specialize in community development. The twins had adjusted to their new life with the resilience Dr. Chen had predicted, thriving in the stability and attention from both parents. And Elena and Adrian had found their way back to each other, slowly and carefully, building something stronger than what they'd had before. "Ms. Carter?" One of the center's volunteers interrupted her thoughts. "The family from the domestic violence shelter is here for their appointment." Elena grabbed her notebook and headed downstairs, focusing on the work that gave her life meaning beyond her complicated relationship. This was what Adrian's resources could do: create genuine help for people who needed it. She was starting to understand that the source of wealth mattered less than how it was used. By the time she finished her appointments and returned to her office, it was nearly noon. Adrian texted that he was bringing the twins for lunch, and Elena felt the familiar flutter of anticipation she'd never quite suppressed around him. They arrived like a small tornado, Lucas racing ahead to show her a drawing he'd made, Emma more measured but equally excited about a book Mrs. Chen had read to them. Adrian followed, carrying bags from the deli Elena liked, looking tired but content. "Rough morning?" Elena asked, accepting the sandwich he handed her. "Lucas decided shoes belong in toilets. Emma informed me my tie was ugly, and I had a conference call with lawyers about the final property transfer," Adrian said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "So, basically, normal." The twins were already exploring Elena's office, familiar enough with the space to know where she kept crayons and paper. They settled at the small table in the corner, chattering to each other in their twin language while they drew. "The annex purchase is approved," Elena said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "We can start construction next month if the permits come through." "They'll come through," Adrian said with the confidence of someone who knew how to make bureaucracy move faster. "I spoke with the mayor's office this morning. They're very interested in supporting community development in this neighborhood." "Because you made a generous donation to his re-election campaign?" "Because the center is creating measurable positive impact and he wants to take credit for it," Adrian corrected with a slight smile. "The donation just ensured I got a meeting to explain the impact." Elena shook her head but couldn't entirely disapprove. This was how Adrian operated now, using his influence and resources, but for legitimate purposes. It still bent rules she preferred to follow strictly, but the results were undeniable. "There's something I need to talk to you about," Adrian said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Elena's guard went up immediately. "What?" "The final transition is happening this weekend," Adrian said. "The last piece of my old organization transfers to new management. After Sunday, I'm completely out. No more ties, no more obligations." Weird relief flooded through her so powerfully she had to set down her sandwich. "Really? You're done?" "I'm done," Adrian confirmed. 8 months of carefully moving pieces, ensuring everyone landed safely, making sure no power vacuum created violence. But it's finished. After this weekend, I'm just a businessman running legitimate enterprises. "How do you feel about it?" Elena asked, studying his face. Adrian was quiet for a moment, considering. "Relieved, mostly. That world gave me power, but it also demanded things I'm not willing to give anymore. Not when I have you and Emma and Lucas. Not when I have something better to build." "Your associates are okay with you leaving?" "The smart ones understand that everything changes," Adrian said. "The ones who aren't smart enough to understand that have already been phased out. I made sure everyone who matters landed in positions where they can succeed without me." Elena reached across the desk and took his hand. "I'm proud of you. I know that probably sounds condescending, but I am. You could have stayed in that world, kept accumulating power. Instead, you chose something harder." "I chose you," Adrian said simply. The rest followed from that choice. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the twins draw elaborate scenes only they understood. Lucas was narrating a story about dragons, while Emma added flowers and trees to his violent battle scene, their different perspectives complementing each other perfectly. "There's something else," Adrian said. "Once the transition is complete, once I'm fully legitimate, I want to make things official between us." Elena's heart jumped. "Official how?" "However you're comfortable with," Adrian said carefully. "Marriage, if you're ready for that. Or a formal partnership agreement. Something that says we're committed to this, to each other, to building a real family together." "Marriage," Elena repeated, testing the word. 3 months ago, she couldn't have imagined it. But now, after watching Adrian follow through on every promise, after building a life together that worked despite their differences, the idea didn't seem impossible. "You don't have to answer now," Adrian said quickly. "I know it's fast. I know we're still figuring things out. But Elena, I want you to know my intentions. I'm not just co-parenting with you. I'm building a life with you. And eventually, I want to make that official." "I need time," Elena said, but she was smiling. "Ask me again after the transition is complete, after you're really done with the old world. Then I'll give you an answer." "That's fair," Adrian said, bringing her hand to his lips. "I can wait." The weekend came faster than Elena expected. Adrian was tense, though he tried to hide it around the twins. On Saturday, he spent the entire day in his study on phone calls and video conferences. Elena kept Emma and Lucas occupied, taking them to the park, reading endless stories, doing anything to give Adrian the space he needed. Sunday morning, he was gone before she woke. A note on her nightstand said he had the final meeting and would be home by dinner. Elena tried not to worry as the day stretched on, tried to focus on the twins and their boundless energy, tried not to imagine everything that could go wrong. He walked through the door at 6:30, looking exhausted but lighter somehow. Elena knew immediately that it was done. "It's over," Adrian said, pulling her into his arms right there in the foyer, not caring that Mrs. Chen and the twins were watching. "Completely, officially over. I'm out." Emma and Lucas cheered, not understanding what was happening, but picking up on their parents' obvious relief. Adrian swept them both up, one in each arm, spinning them until they shrieked with laughter. "Does this mean you can play more?" Lucas asked when Adrian set them down. "It means I can play all the time," Adrian said. "No more long meetings, no more phone calls that can't wait. Just us." That night, after the twins were asleep, Adrian and Elena sat on the terrace where they'd had their first real conversation months ago. The city sprawled below them, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. "How does it feel?" Elena asked, curled against Adrian's side. "Strange," Adrian admitted. "I spent 15 years building that empire. It defined who I was for so long, and now it's just gone. Do you regret it?" "Not for a second," Adrian said, kissing the top of her head. "That life gave me power, but this life gives me purpose. You, the twins, the community center, building something that actually helps people. That matters more than anything I did before." Elena tilted her face up to look at him. "Ask me again." "Ask you what?" "What you asked me at lunch on Friday." Adrian's expression shifted to something intense and hopeful. "Elena Carter, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving I'm worthy of you and our children? Will you build this complicated, imperfect, real life with me?" "Yes," Elena said, surprising herself with how certain she felt. "Yes, I'll marry you. I'll build this life with you. I'll keep challenging you when you need it and supporting you when you need that instead. Yes." Adrian kissed her then, deep and thorough and full of promises. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pulled a small box from his pocket. "I bought this 3 years ago," he said, opening it to reveal a simple platinum band with a single diamond. "The day before you disappeared. I was planning to ask you that weekend." Elena stared at the ring, tears blurring her vision. "You kept it all this time?" "I couldn't let it go," Adrian admitted. "Even when I thought I'd never see you again, I couldn't quite give up hope, so I kept it, just in case." He slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all this time for exactly this moment. Elena looked at it through her tears, at this symbol of everything they'd lost and found again. "I love you," she whispered. "I've loved you this whole time, even when I was trying not to. Even when I ran. Even when I thought loving you was a mistake." "It's not a mistake," Adrian said fiercely. "We're not a mistake, we're just complicated. But that's okay. The best things usually are." They sat wrapped together as the city hummed below them, as their children slept safely inside, as their future spread out with all its imperfect possibility. The months that followed were a blur of planning and building. They married in a small ceremony in the mansion's garden, just family and close friends. Emma was flower girl, scattering petals with serious concentration. Lucas was ring bearer, racing down the aisle so fast he nearly tripped. Dr. Chen officiated, having become a close friend to both of them. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony. Elena's vows were simple. "I promise to challenge you when you need it and support you when you need that instead. I promise to keep our family grounded in values that matter. I promise to build this complicated life with you, one day at a time." Adrian's vows were equally straightforward. "I promise to keep choosing you and our family over everything else. I promise to use my resources and influence for good. I promise to be the man you see when you look at me with love instead of the man I was before." The community center expanded, adding the annex and then a third building. Elena completed her master's degree and became the center's full-time director. Adrian's legitimate business empire grew, providing funding not just for their center, but for similar projects across the city. Together, they created a foundation focused on helping families transition out of poverty with dignity intact. The twins grew, becoming more themselves every day. Emma inherited Elena's compassion and Adrian's strategic thinking, already organizing her preschool classmates with efficient kindness. Lucas had Adrian's confidence and Elena's emotional intelligence, fearless but sensitive to others' feelings. On their first anniversary, Adrian took Elena back to the restaurant where they'd first met. They sat at the same table, and Elena laughed when she realized he'd arranged it deliberately. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night?" Adrian asked, taking her hand across the table. "I apologize for spilling coffee on your suit approximately 700 times," Elena said. After that, "When I asked why you were working 3 jobs to pay for school," Elena thought back, the memory surfacing slowly. "I said I wanted to help people, that I wanted to do work that mattered, even if it meant struggling while I trained for it. And I said power was the only thing that really mattered," Adrian recalled, shaking his head, "that helping people was naive, that the world rewarded strength, not compassion." "You were wrong," Elena said gently. "I was wrong about a lot of things," Adrian agreed, "but you helped me see that. You showed me that real strength is choosing compassion even when you have the power to choose force. That the world doesn't have to be about domination, it can be about building things together. And you showed me that principles without pragmatism are just pretty theories," Elena countered. "That sometimes you need resources and influence to actually help people, not just good intentions." "We balance each other," Adrian said. "We do," Elena agreed. "You keep me from being too idealistic. I keep you from being too ruthless. And somehow we meet in the middle where real good happens." They toasted to complicated love and imperfect families and the messy, beautiful reality they'd built together. 2 years later, Elena stood in the community center's main hall watching their foundation's annual gala. The event raised millions for poverty reduction programs across the state. Former shelter residents now running their own businesses gave testimonials. Children from the after-school program performed music they'd learned. Politicians and business leaders mingled with community members, all united in supporting the center's mission. Adrian found her in the crowd, sliding an arm around her waist. "You should be up there taking credit for all this." "This isn't about credit," Elena said, leaning into him. "It's about what we can accomplish when we work together. You, me, the whole community. That's the point." "Spoken like the woman I fell in love with," Adrian murmured against her ear. Emma and Lucas were across the room with Mrs. Chen, both dressed in formal clothes they'd only agreed to wear because Elena had bribed them with extra dessert. Lucas was trying to convince another child to trade shoes with him. Emma was explaining something with elaborate hand gestures. Both of them were so completely, perfectly themselves. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked Adrian quietly. "Giving up the empire, choosing this life instead?" Adrian pulled her closer, his answer immediate and certain. "Not once. That empire gave me power I didn't know what to do with. This life gives me purpose. You give me purpose. They give me purpose." He nodded toward the twins. "I'd make the same choice 1,000 times over." Elena turned in his arms to face him fully. "I'm glad I came back that night, that I let you into their lives, into my life again." "So am I," Adrian said. "Though for the record, I would have found you eventually. I had people looking." "Of course you did," Elena laughed. "But I'm glad I made the choice to stay before you had to track me down." "Me too. It's better that you chose this. Chose us." The gala continued around them, their foundation's work on full display. Their children happy and healthy and growing into good humans. Their complicated love story still being written one day at a time. It wasn't the fairy tale Elena had imagined as a young woman. It was better, messier, more real, more honest. They still argued sometimes, still had to negotiate their different approaches to problems. Adrian occasionally made decisions that bent Elena's ethical comfort zone, and Elena sometimes held so firmly to her principles that Adrian had to remind her about practical reality. But they worked through it together, finding compromises, learning each other's boundaries, building a partnership based on mutual respect rather than identical worldviews. 5 years after that rain-soaked night, when Elena had stepped into the street with 2 sick children and found herself face-to-face with the man she'd been running from, she stood in their bedroom watching Adrian help Emma with her homework while Lucas explained his latest invention, a machine made of blocks and string that was supposed to make breakfast but mostly just made noise. "Dad, I don't understand this math problem," Emma said, frustration clear in her voice. "Show me," Adrian said, setting aside his tablet to focus completely on her worksheet. Elena watched him explain fractions with the same focused intensity he once brought to criminal enterprises, watched Emma's face light up with understanding, watched Lucas abandon his invention to climb into Adrian's lap just because he wanted to be close to his father. This was what she'd feared 3 years ago, that Adrian's influence would corrupt their children, that wealth would make them entitled, that his past would somehow taint their future. Instead, what she saw were children who understood both compassion and strength, who knew that having resources meant responsibility to help others, who were growing up watching their parents work together despite differences, building something good from complicated circumstances. "Mama, come help," Lucas called. "Emma's hogging Dad." "I'm not hogging, I'm learning," Emma protested. Elena joined them on the floor, settling into the familiar chaos of family life. Adrian's hand found hers automatically, their fingers interlacing while they helped their children with homework and inventions and the thousand small needs of being 5 years old. That night, after the twins were finally asleep after 3 stories and 4 glasses of water, and multiple reassurances that yes, the nightlight would stay on all night, Elena and Adrian collapsed onto their bed. "I'm exhausted," Elena said. "Me too," Adrian agreed, pulling her against his chest. "But happy." "Yeah," Elena said, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "Happy." They lay in the dark, listening to the house settle around them, their children breathing softly in the next room, their lives tangled together in ways Elena never could have predicted but wouldn't trade for anything. "Thank you," Adrian said quietly. "For what?" "For giving me a chance, for seeing past what I was to what I could become, for making me want to be better." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "For everything." "Thank you for proving you could change," Elena replied. "For following through on every promise. For being the father I didn't know they needed and the partner I didn't think I could have." "We're quite the team," Adrian said. "We are," Elena agreed and closed her eyes, surrendering to sleep with the man who'd once terrified her and now made her feel safer than she'd ever felt alone. Their story wasn't perfect. It was complicated and messy and required constant work. But it was real, built on honest effort and mutual respect, and the kind of love that survived because both people chose it every single day. In the morning, Elena would wake to Lucas jumping on the bed, and Emma demanding pancakes, and Adrian somehow managing to look dignified even with bedhead. She'd go to work at the center, helping more families find their footing. Adrian would handle his business empire, continuing to expand legitimate enterprises while supporting causes they both believed in. They'd navigate disagreements and celebrate victories and keep building this imperfect life together, one choice at a time. And somewhere in the city, another struggling mother would walk into their community center desperate for help. The staff would welcome her with the same compassion Elena had needed but been too proud to accept. They'd give her resources and support and a path forward. Because that's what this was all for, creating the safety net Elena wished had existed when she'd needed it, using Adrian's resources to build something that actually mattered. That was their legacy. Not the empire Adrian had built, or the principles Elena had clung to, but what they'd created together when they chose to meet in the complicated middle where real good happened. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.